You already checked your ID twice. You already printed your boarding pass. You already told yourself this trip would go smoothly. And then a stranger in a TSA uniform points you toward a payment kiosk and says $45 right now, or you do not fly today. This is not a rumor from a travel forum. This is a real fee. It is already active, and thousands of travelers are being pulled aside every single week without understanding why it happened to them. Some of them had a real ID, some of them had a passport, some of them did everything right on paper, and they still got flagged. Today, we are breaking down every single trigger behind this fee. The ones airlines never explain, the ones gate agents rush past, and the one tiny detail on your ticket that decides whether you pay nothing or pay twice. Before we go further, if you fly even once or twice a year, save this video, because the moment you are standing at security is the worst possible time to learn any of this. And if you want more warnings like this before your next trip, subscribe to Fly Smart After 70. We cover the fees and traps that airlines quietly hope you never notice. Number 1, what the $45 fee actually is. TSA ConfirmID is a real government program, not an airline charge, and that distinction matters more than most people realize. It applies to travelers who show up at the checkpoint without a real ID, without a valid passport, and without any other accepted form of identification. If that happens to you, you are offered a choice: pay $45 through the official pay.gov system, or step out of line and lose your spot while security figures out what to do with you. The payment covers a 10-day travel window, which means if your trip runs longer than that, you may need to pay again for the return leg. And a round trip that stretches past 10 days can quietly turn one $45 charge into $90 without you ever realizing it was coming. Airlines do not collect this money, and airlines cannot waive it, which is exactly why so many travelers get frustrated with gate agents who genuinely cannot help them, no matter how politely or firmly the request is made. The fee exists because a meaningful share of travelers still show up without acceptable identification, and lawmakers decided the cost of processing them should fall on those travelers, not on taxpayers footing the bill for everyone else. It sounds simple in theory: show an ID, avoid the fee, but in practice, the definition of an acceptable ID is stricter than most people assume, and plenty of documents that feel perfectly valid in daily life do not meet the standard at a federal checkpoint. Once you understand that this is an identity verification fee, not a punishment for bad luck, the rest of these triggers start making a lot more sense, because almost every scenario in this video traces back to one simple question: does the system recognize you as exactly the person your ticket says you are? Number 2, the name and ID mismatches nobody warns you about. Here is where most seniors get blindsided, because it usually has nothing to do with forgetting an ID and everything to do with details that quietly stopped matching each other. If the name on your government ID does not match the name on your boarding pass letter for letter, that mismatch alone can push you into secondary verification, and from there into the fee. A missing middle name is one of the most common culprits. Your license says your full legal name. Your airline profile only has a first and last name, and the system treats that gap as a red flag instead of a typo. Hyphenated last names cause the same kind of confusion, especially when one system stores the hyphen and another strips it out completely. If you carry a suffix like junior, senior, or the third, and that suffix appears on your ID but not on your reservation, The verification software may not recognize you as the same traveler at all. Nicknames saved inside a loyalty account create a similar trap. Your frequent flyer profile says Bob, your driver's license says Robert, and neither the airline nor TSA is going to guess which one is correct. Recently changed your legal name after a marriage, a divorce, or a personal decision, and every account you have not updated yet becomes a landmine waiting to go off at the checkpoint. Address mismatches between your RID and your airline profile rarely trigger the fee on their own, but combined with any other small inconsistency, they tip the system toward flagging you anyway. And if you ever merged two frequent flyer accounts together, old data sometimes survives underneath the new profile, quietly reintroducing an old misspelled name that you thought was fixed years ago, sitting invisible until the exact moment a verification system pulls it back up. What makes all of this especially frustrating is that none of these mismatches feel serious when you first notice them. A missing middle initial looks like a minor detail. A saved nickname feels harmless. A leftover hyphen seems like nothing worth fixing. And that is precisely why they keep catching travelers off guard. The verification software behind TSA ConfirmID is not designed to interpret intent. It is designed to compare strings of text, and a system built to compare text has no way of knowing that Bob and Robert are the same person unless every field lines up exactly. This is also why simply having a valid current ID in your wallet does not automatically protect you, because the fee is triggered by a failure to match, and a technically valid document can still fail to match a booking that was entered slightly differently months earlier. Number 3, when renewed or new documents work against you. You would think a brand new ID would protect you, and often it does, but the timing can work against you in ways nobody explains at the DMV. A renewed driver's license that has not synced into the federal verification database, yet can still get flagged, even though the physical card in your hand is perfectly valid. The same problem shows up with passports. A renewal creates a new passport number, and until every database catches up, that mismatch between your old records and your new document can trigger an unnecessary review. Even a freshly issued real ID is not automatically safe, because some state systems take days to fully populate into the national verification network, which means the very card designed to protect you from this fee can, for a short window, do the opposite. Older seniors face a slightly higher version of this risk, simply because many still carry IDs issued years ago under older formatting rules, and those older formats sometimes clash with newer verification software in ways a younger traveler with a recently issued license never experiences. There is a strange irony sitting inside all of this. The traveler who renewed their ID early did everything responsibly, and walked into the airport feeling fully prepared is sometimes the exact traveler who gets stopped simply because the paperwork behind the scenes had not finished catching up to the plastic card in their hand. A passport renewal in particular can ripple outward in ways people rarely expect, since airline profiles, loyalty programs, and even old saved boarding passes may still be referencing a passport number that no longer exists, creating a mismatch that has nothing to do with your actual identity and everything to do with database timing. Number 4, timing mistakes that have nothing to do with your ID. Some of the riskiest moments happen long before you reach the checkpoint, and they have nothing to do with whether your ID is valid. Checking in too late compresses your entire verification window into a few rushed minutes and rushed minutes are exactly when small mismatches get missed until it is too late to fix them quietly. On the opposite end, checking in far too early can also cause friction because some systems have not fully activated your reservation data yet, leaving verification tools with incomplete information to work from. Travel experts often point to an 18 to 22-hour window before departure as the sweet spot, early enough to catch problems while you still have time to fix them, late enough that your full reservation details are already locked in and stable. If your flight gets canceled and the airline automatically rebooks you, watch closely because a new confirmation number sometimes fails to carry over the exact identity details from your original booking, effectively resetting your verification status and putting you right back at risk of the fee on a flight you never even chose. International connections raise the stakes even further, since you are now being checked against two or more verification systems instead of one, and any inconsistency between them multiplies your chances of getting stopped, especially when you are moving between a domestic leg and an international legs on the same itinerary under slightly different rules. Layovers add another layer of risk that few travelers think about in advance, because a delay on your first flight can push your connection into a tighter window, and a tighter window means less time for an agent to properly resolve a small identity discrepancy before you need to be at your next gate. Even something as ordinary as a same-day flight change, requested for convenience rather than caused by a cancellation, can sometimes reset the same underlying verification fields that a full rebooking would, which is why it pays to double-check your details anytime your itinerary changes for any reason at all, not just after a disruption. Number 5, booking habits that quietly raise your risk. A surprising number of these situations start weeks before you ever get to the airport, buried inside how and where you booked your ticket. Budget airlines in particular have been known to charge processing costs on top of the standard $45 when identity issues come up during in-person check-in, which means the total bill for the exact same mistake can be noticeably higher depending on which airline you chose. Airlines also tend to bury identity verification language deep inside their fine print, using different internal names for the same underlying issue, so you may never see the words ConfirmID anywhere on your itinerary, even though it is exactly what you are walking into. Checking in through an airport kiosk or an in-person counter instead of online statistically increases your odds of triggering additional verification, simply because staff have less time to catch small mismatches before you reach security. Before you ever book, it genuinely helps to check your airline profile the same way you would check your ID, comparing every letter against your government documents rather than assuming an old saved profile is still accurate. Third-party booking sites add yet another layer of risk, since a name typed once into a comparison website can get copied across multiple confirmation emails, multiple airline systems, and multiple loyalty accounts, multiplying a single typo into several separate mismatches that all need to be found and corrected individually. Group bookings carry a similar danger, especially when one family member books tickets for several relatives at once, because a small transcription error made while entering someone else's legal name is far easier to miss than an error you would catch instantly on your own document. None of this means booking online is risky. It simply means the convenience of saving a profile once and reusing it for years only works in your favor if that profile actually stays accurate the entire time. Number 6. What happens once you are standing at the checkpoint? Understanding the process itself takes away a lot of the panic if this ever happens to you. Gate agents and even most TSA officers at the initial line often cannot waive the fee themselves, because the decision sits with a supervisor, and asking to speak with one is a completely reasonable request rather than a confrontational one. If your case requires supervisor level verification, be prepared for it to potentially cost more time and, in some documented situations, additional scrutiny compared to a standard checkpoint fee payment. Always ask for a written receipt confirming exactly what you were charged and why, because that piece of paper comes essential if you ever need to dispute the charge later. The fine print most travelers never read includes exactly this kind of detail, spelling out what counts as an acceptable form of identification and what does not, and reading it once at home saves enormous stress later. Expect the entire process to take longer than a normal security screening, since additional identity verification steps are layered on top of the usual bag and body screening, and lines behind travelers using ConfirmID often move noticeably slower than lines full of travelers with standard, already accepted identification. Staying calm during this process genuinely helps, not because attitude changes the outcome, but because a clear, patient explanation of your situation gives staff the best chance of resolving it correctly on the first attempt instead of escalating a simple mismatch into a longer conversation than it needed to be. Number 7. What to do if you believe you were charged unfairly. Mistakes happen inside large verification systems, and when they happen to you, you do have real options. If you believe the fee was applied incorrectly, for example, because you actually had an acceptable form of ID that staff overlooked, you can file a credit card dispute using your written receipt as supporting evidence. You also have the right to file a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation if you feel the fee itself was poorly explained or disclosed at any point in your booking or travel experience. Before accepting any charge at the gate, it is worth simply asking what specifically triggered the fee, whether it can be avoided next time, and whether the charge is final or still under review, because a calm, specific question often gets a more complete answer than a general complaint. Ancillary fees across the airline industry have been quietly expanding for years, and identity verification charges are simply the newest version of a much older pattern, which is exactly why understanding your rights here protects more than just this one trip. Keep every piece of paperwork tied to a disputed charge, the receipt, any written confirmation from a supervisor, and even a simple note with the date and the name of the agent you spoke with, because disputes resolved weeks after your trip depend entirely on documentation you can no longer recreate from memory. If you paid the fee yourself, but believe your airline's own error caused the mismatch in the first place, it is reasonable to request compensation directly from the airline separately from any dispute you file with your card issuer, since the airline's booking system may be the actual source of the problem, even though TSA collected the payment. Number 8. Protecting yourself before your next trip. The good news is that almost every trigger we just covered can be neutralized with a few minutes of preparation. Compare every single letter of your name across your ID, your passport, and your airline profile, treating small differences as seriously as major ones. Verify your real ID or passport status well before travel rather than assuming last year's document still matches this year's rules. Check in inside that 18 to 22-hour window whenever your schedule allows it, giving yourself enough time to fix a mismatch without giving the system time to lose track of your details. If your name changed for any reason, update every airline profile and loyalty account you own, not just the one for your next flight. And whenever possible, avoid relying on in-person or kiosk check-in as your first option, since online check-in gives you the calmest environment to catch a problem while you are still safely at home. Set a simple yearly habit for yourself. Once a year, pull out your driver's license, your passport if you have one, and your main airline profile, and read every field side by side, because a habit repeated once annually catches problems long before a specific upcoming trip forces you to rush the same review under pressure. Share this checklist with a spouse, a sibling, or a friend who travels with you regularly, since a second set of eyes often catches a mismatch that feels invisible to the person who has looked at their own name and birth date 1,000 times before. Number 9. Why this fee catches so many experienced travelers off guard. It would be easy to assume this fee mostly affects nervous first-time flyers, but the reality is closer to the opposite, since travelers who fly often tend to trust their own habits the most, and trusted habits are exactly what stop getting double-checked over time. Someone who has flown the same route for a decade may not have looked closely at their airline profile in years, simply because nothing ever seemed to go wrong before, and that long stretch of nothing going wrong quietly becomes its own kind of blind spot. Frequent travelers also tend to accumulate more accounts, more saved profiles, and more historical bookings than occasional travelers, which statistically increases the number of places a small inconsistency could be hiding. None of this means experience makes you careless. It simply means experience can create a false sense of certainty, and certainty is precisely the mindset that skips the 2-minute check that would have caught the problem early. The $45 TSA ConfirmID fee is not going away, and honestly, understanding it properly is the closest thing you have to a shortcut past it entirely. Most travelers who get hit with this fee are not careless. They are simply unaware of how many small details had to line up perfectly for them to avoid it. Now you know exactly where those details live, from your ID format to your booking name to the timing of your check-in, and knowing where a mistake usually hides is most of the work needed to avoid stepping in it. None of these fixes require special equipment or extra money. They simply require 10 quiet minutes at home, comparing documents instead of assuming they already match, and that small investment of time is consistently cheaper than any version of paying the fee itself. Which of these situations sounds closest to something that could happen to you? Tell us in the comments, because your answer might help another traveler avoid the exact same mistake. And if you found this useful, subscribe to Fly Smart after 70 so the next fee, the next fine print trap, and the next quiet airline policy change reaches you before it reaches your wallet.